My name is Lex, and this week on Spidey Signals, me and my co-host Alex discuss the Clone Saga, Spider-Man's status quo, and whether or not comic books were even a good idea in the first place. Get ready to experience maximum clonage, whatever that is, because it's time for Spidey Signals. Welcome back to Spidey Signals, the podcast where two guys with the same name talk about Spider-Man. I'm Lex.
And I'm Alex.
Last week, we talked about Spider-Man, the 1977 TV movie extravaganza.
What an extravaganza
That was something.
that was, yeah. That's I've already done what I can to push it out of my memory.
On Halloween, which was only about 2 days ago from when we were recording this, I watched Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, which is a movie I'd never seen before. It's not good. But
No, it is
in the
not.
opening credits, who would I see but our old friend Michael Pataki, who is Captain Barbera.
It was a Halloween miracle.
It was a Halloween miracle. I sent it a DM to Alex. I was like, "What the fuck? I found it. What is he doing here?" I like straight up like was completely shocked that he was in other films.
Who is this Michael Myers character?
He was like one of the doctors that talks to Loomis. He's not in the movie much, but it's like, hey, I remember you.
That's
exciting.
It's a real Michael Pataki time of year.
It's a real Michael Pataki time of the year. But anyway, we've got much more pressing matters to talk about.
We sure do.
We're talking about for me, I only glimpsed a small portion of it. But this week we're going to try to talk about the Clone Saga.
The infamous Clone Saga.
The infamous Clone Saga.
It is almost necessary to attach.
This is I don't even know what to call a storyline, I guess.
Yeah.
It's so like broad that you can't really describe it as anything other than just like a group of stories that all have a similar thing. Because it's not like a big story, like line-wide event. Because it's like they had other stuff going on at the same time.
It dominated essentially all four of the running books for about 1.5 years, close to 2 years.
Yeah, so this was released over 2 years from October of 1994 to December of 1996. But because we're not going to read 2 years of 4 different comic lines because we're not crazy people, Alex picked out 6 issues that basically lay out the beginning of the run. And then once we get through that, Alex is going to describe to me basically what happens in the rest of the Clone Saga. So for me specifically, and also Alex, the comics we actually read this week are Amazing Spider-Man 149, which came out in the 70s and was sort of a precursor to this storyline. The Power and Responsibility story arc that take place over Web of Spider-Man 117, Amazing Spider-Man 394, Spider-Man 51, and Spectacular Spider-Man 217. And then right after that, there was one more story that sort of introduces Ben Reilly as the Scarlet Spider, and it's Web of Spider-Man 118. These comics were written by Jerry Conway, Terry Cavanaugh, our old friend J.M. DeMatteis, Howard Mackey, and Tom DeFalco. And the artwork for them was done by Ross Andrew, Stephen Butler, Mark Bagley, Tom Lyle, and Sal Buscema.
Really good mix of writers and artists on this that I like a lot.
Yeah. Specifically, there's one comic in particular. I think it's ASM 394. That's the J.M. DeMatteis one, and that's easily the best one because I'd say he's the best writer out of this bunch. The letters are by Annette Kawecki. I think I'm saying that right. Steve Dutro, Joe Rosen, Richard Starkings, and Clem Robbins. And the coloring is by Janice Cohen, Kevin Tinsley, and Bob Sharon. I guess we can go into personal experiences. I don't really have any personal experiences with the Clone Saga. It's one of those, like Craven's Last Hunt, it's one of those stories that you hear a lot about. Only in this case, it's almost entirely negative things that you hear about. It's one of those things that it's infamous. You know, you hear about how it was an incredibly long storyline that like tore the Marvel bullpen apart because everyone had different ideas of what to do with it, and nobody knew how to end it, and it ended up going way longer than it needed to, and it ended up, fucking up Spider-Man comics tremendously for a very long time. But it was certainly interesting to finally get through it, even at least a very small portion of it. Alex, you're much more knowledgeable about the Clone Saga. What are your sort of personal experiences with it?
For a majority of my life, I was only familiar with broad swaths of it. I knew more like Ben Reilly as a costume than a character because it's a lot more strikingly like visually different than the Spider-Man suit.
Yeah.
But very early in quarantine, or maybe even like in the 6 or so months preceding it, I was spending a lot of time at the library in the town I lived in Iowa, and they had at one point all 5 volumes of the collected like trade paperbacks for rental. And I remember distinctly getting the first 3 in order, and someone then checked out the fourth one and didn't turn it back in for like all of quarantine. I guess I could have read it online at some point, but I just kind of fell off of it. So I've only read 60 to 70% of the Clone Saga. I never finished what's collected, but honestly, at the point where I stopped reading, it was getting really convoluted and stupid, so it wasn't some great big loss for me. I do say this, admittedly, as a self-described fan of the Clone Saga. I think Ben Reilly's an interesting character. I really like where it goes in the first few issues, first few arcs. I do think a lot of it is stupid, and some of the characters they made up and came up with for this go nowhere and do nothing. We'll talk about them, but like Judas Traveler, I think is just about the biggest example of that. Uh, it's weird, it's wild, and it's wacky, and it's not the pinnacle of Spider-Man storytelling, but I do think that it deserved coverage on this show where we're talking about like good arcs and more maligned arcs, and this is something that had to be talked about, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
but I
There's there's
am a fan.
there's a lot to talk about here. And the issues that you picked out, I mean, obviously they make the most sense because they're the sort of the issues that establish this line going forward that you'll elaborate on after we finish talking about them. But I don't really have much to say about them. Most of these issues are, I'm going to just say right now, most of these issues are kind of boring. There's not a whole lot that really grabbed me.
Hmm.
I think the ones I have the most on are Amazing Spider-Man 394 and Web of Spider-Man 118. But the rest of these are just kind of like, I have like 3 or 4 notes max for each issue.
Yeah, these aren't terribly exciting ones, but they do set the stage for everything else that happens. I don't know how this episode is going to pan out compared to lengthwise. We're covering 6 issues of material here plus a little extra, but I'm not going to go into a overkill, bore you to tears exposition of what happens over the rest of the Clone Saga. Just enough to tell you the story, so now you know. But oh, it's we're gonna get into it. It gets a little all over the place. But yeah, if you're ready, I'm happy to go into it.
Yeah, let's dive into this. Let's go into the plot.
So we're starting all of this off with a bit of a throwback from the rest of the series. This is really the seed of where everything starts in Amazing Spider-Man 149. Did you have a year published on that? I don't have it written down on me right in front of what I'm looking at. It's 70s, right?
1975.
Yeah, there we go. A pre-Star Wars world of science fiction.
This is still about 2 years removed from the death of Gwen Stacy.
Yeah, right in the throes of the Jackal plot line. This is part of a continuing story where the Jackal has revealed his identity to be that of Peter Parker's biology professor, Miles Warren. He's knocked out Spider-Man and taken him and Ned Leeds, who is still alive at this point, to his secret lab. That's
The the
where
the, f- the first thing I immediately in this flashback sequence, the first thing I wrote was Bronze Age comics were like so wordy. Like there's
Oh
just
yeah.
blocks and blocks of massive walls of text to read about shit. And like it
Mhm.
already exhausted me by the time we finished the flashback explaining how Peter got in this situation.
There's some really goofy shit in this issue, and it starts off that way and it just proceeds that way. There's this one moment later, like towards the end with Professor Warren that just made me audibly go, "Oh God, what the fuck? I don't remember that. That's so stupid." But we'll get there. um when Spider-Man revives, comes back up for air, the Jackal tells him the genesis of his revenge plot in a very like Bond villain moment. How he secretly loved Gwen Stacy, and how when she died, he was devastated and blamed Spider-Man for her death.
Yeah,
Uh,
he says that he thought of Gwen as like the daughter he never had, but like you could tell he
yeah,
totally wanted to fuck Gwen.
this is not the spectacular Professor Warren, the gat-toting, no nonsense.
I
Fuck
wish
you.
the Spectacular Spider-Man Miles Warren was in here because he'd be like, I'm gonna fucking shoot you with my gun.
Yeah, this is the classic quote unquote weirdo pervert that we know and love, question mark. Not the cool guy.
You would have gotten me
Uh
too'd, absolutely.
yeah, for sure. This is not a man who deserves a name in the history books, career wise. He had Serba, an assistant, I guess, clone Gwen's DNA unbeknownst to him, to Serba,
Yeah,
that is. He like faked him out, telling him it was some other animal tissue sample.
yeah, they were like doing clone experiments and they had like successfully cloned Frog, and they're like, Miles Warren gives Serba like this plate of like DNA that he had swabbed from Gwen, or what, I don't know when that happened, but he had swabbed it from Gwen. And it's like, here's like rat samples, go grow this. And it isn't until like the clone is finished that Serba realizes, he's like, oh fuck, this is a person. Like,
Yeah, Serba has a huge ethical like objection to this, and in an attempt to silence him from canceling the experiment, Warren inadvertently strangles Serba to death, breaks his
he like
neck. It's not
he
very
like
clear.
he like puts his hand over Serba's mouth, like trying to get him to shut up, and that somehow instantly kills him.
Yeah, it's a very like we don't want to be EC Comics gross with this. Let's just have him oopsie daisy him to death.
Whoops.
His mind is becoming more unhinged, and as he goes to dispose of the body of Serba, he like really coincidentally overhears a seminar on the Jackal. So he's like, "Yeah, that's cool. I'm the Jackal. That's me." Uh, and he goes into this. Well, he's telling Spider-Man all of this. We're still there, but he goes on to say like, "And I had to create a costume." And it's like, did you? Like, what the fuck does that mean? You've had a psychotic break and now you're evil, but he's talking like this is totally like, well, I had to I had to do this and that. And it's like, yeah, of course he did.
Was any of this really necessary? That's gonna be a theme that will crop up throughout this entire episode. Was any of this really necessary?
Absolutely, it was. um, the Jackal would then, after having this costume created, this persona made up, he inhabits it as a way to like cope with the things he's doing, and he's got this clone of Gwen Stacy made, and reconditions her to have the same memories as the original Gwen, in the hopes of using her as like a tool and a pawn against Spider-Man.
How does that even work?
It's the '70s, so they have stuff like that now. You know how
Hmm.
Nick Hammond Spider-Man was like, "Oh, they do have the technology to make people believe stuff like that now." It's the '70s. There was a time for stuff like that.
I guess you're right. Maybe it was the guru who showed up and showed him how to reimplant false memories like Total Recall.
Classic Guru Byron moment.
Guru Byron.
When Spider-Man attempts to attack the Jackal again, the Jackal manages to get away. Meanwhile, at the Daily Bugle, Betty Brant is upset because Ned and Peter have been missing for 2 days, which just happens a lot. As MJ, J. Jonah Jameson, and Joe Robertson, sorry, a name, thing across the comics there, attempt to comfort her, Peter suddenly enters the room, and good Spider-Man timing, and claims he has no knowledge of having seen Ned and hasn't seen him in a week. At the exact same time, Peter Man, Jesus Christ,
Peter Man.
what the fuck is that slip up? Peter is in his Spider-Man identity, web slinging over to Shea Stadium to meet the Jackal for a final confrontation.
Go Mets. Love the Mets.
Nearly immediately, the Jackal drugs Spider-Man again, who is just not in top form in this comic. He's just getting drugged left and right.
Apparently
Uh,
not.
he comes up once again to find that the Jackal has created an exact duplicate of him to fight. Already in costume, already with web shooters. There's a second Spider-Man here. To make matters worse, the Jackal has Ned Leeds tied to a bomb by the wrists, primed to go off in just a matter of minutes.
This is like an incredibly elaborate bomb because he's attached to the bomb, but the bomb can only be disabled by the quote unquote real Spider-Man,
It's like a
which
biometric lock on it or
it's like a
something.
it's like a biometric lock, but they're genetically identical. And as we'll see, once I finish reading this issue, I actually, uh, in all fairness, read the next issue after this just for
Mhm.
fun, just to see if they picked up on this at all, and they do. Where Peter like goes to Dr. Connors and they like do these like incredibly intense scientific experiments to like try and figure out if Peter is like the real Peter, or he's not a clone or whatever. And at the end of it, he like takes the file and like throws it away, and it's like It's like I already know I'm the real Spider-Man, and it's like you just open a fucking can of worms. They're gonna bite you in the ass. Fucking 20 years later.
Yeah, it's they a common thing across the Clone Saga is the fan backlash to the idea of whether or not Peter is the clone or not. The answer backflips and flip flops and changes and left and right. It's stupid, to be frank. But
Yes,
yeah, uh, it's so stupid that there's plot devices like biometric locks that only respond to Spider-Man on bombs. Um, in this little arena that the Jackal has set up to have these Spider-Men fight each other, he has the clone of Gwen with him, seated beside him, who is mortified that the Jackal is having these two Spider-Men murder each other. She chews him out and gives him a what for verbally. Uh, that strikes a chord with Warren, who in like an incredibly poorly paced sequence, I guess what to call it. Warren realizes there is no Jackal and only himself, and he killed the people he's killed. And he snaps out of his like demented state and tries to redeem himself by freeing Ned Leeds, cutting his attachment from the bomb. He doesn't get clear of the bomb in time, which seemingly kills him.
yeah, he gets fucking like vaporized.
It'll be revealed issues from now, decades from now, that this was like a second Miles Warren that that the original Jackal made as like a genetic weapon to confront Peter here. It
And
doesn't matter.
I fucking hate comic books,
Yeah, nobody ever fucking dies. None of these people are dead when they
dude.
die. Don't
I
worry about
hate
it.
comic books so much
It's the Clone Saga. It sucks. Uh,
already.
but yes, we get a supposed death of the Jackal. When the rubble clears, the explosion has collapsed of quite a bit of the stadium, seemingly killing the clone of Spider-Man, with the seemingly real Spider-Man waking up. Um, there's attached to it's never really explicitly stated. I don't remember where it is or not, but in the meantime, before the funeral, the quote unquote funeral that happens at the end here, Spider-Man supposedly disposes of the body of the clone in a smokestack of a factory. Attached to Power and Responsibility is this little 4 issue. They call it a Marvel flip book. It's just like a quick and loose little story that expounds on the Jackal and his creation of this clone from this issue. It also goes into a little more detail and shows Peter like dropping the body off in the incinerator, but it doesn't,
Yeah,
quite get incinerated. Uh,
I did not read that section, so
yeah,
it just seems like it doesn't really matter how
yeah.
it shook out.
It's nothing context, groundbreaking or anything, but it does illuminate a little more into that night, and does expound on the idea that Peter attempted to dispose of the body of the clone. Um, later, Peter and the Gwen clone are paying their respects to Gwen at the real Gwen's grave. There, the clone of Gwen tells Peter that she realizes she could never know him like the original did, and decides that it is best for her to leave and never return. Peter has suspicions that he might be the clone. He's having a moral quandary about it and returns to his apartment, all sullen and hurt and Peter Parkery, and is shocked to find there's someone in the apartment. He rushes up to see who it is and is delighted to see that it's MJ. He lets himself in, and the two begin to make up for their fight.
And
This
they
ends.
fuck. They fuck is what they do.
They absolutely do. This is the end of this first issue, this introductory, like, first toe in the water of the Clone Saga. There is a neat little moment in that little 4-part add-on to this that ends with, like, the clone going home after he wakes up from the smokestack and seeing that moment of Peter and MJ kissing, and is like, oh fuck, no, I'm the clone, oh god. Which is interesting. But we transition from that to the beginning of the Power and Responsibility arc, what begins the proper Clone Saga. Uh,
Yeah,
Building up to this, there had been a Mystery Man arc, um,
love
where
those.
some dude in a brown jacket who we never saw from the neck up had been like calling to check on May, who had recently had a stroke. She's been hospitalized, and who is this weird man who is keeping up and checking on Aunt May? Well, he physically visits the hospital, and on the roof of the hospital in Forest Hills, Spider-Man, who is on the roof, comes face to face with the mystery man, who is Peter Parker. Ooh, spooky.
Ooh.
After being manipulated a number of times in his weird long life, the Spider-Man refuses to believe that this is anything but an imposter and attacks him with his fists immediately.
like
Um,
like I actually kind of like this fight scene. I think it's cool, even if like the central concept that will be revealed later on, where it's like the clone was the real Peter all along. Like that's really stupid.
yeah, it was intended to be that like severe of a change too, but the fan backlash was way intense.
And like I can already just immediately hear like this first issue of the entire saga. I can already tell like what they're trying to do because Marvel's bullpen has like a two-prong quote unquote problem that they need to solve. Uh Problem number one is that lots of the Marvel bullpen like hate the fact that Peter is married.
Hmm.
It's a thing that has existed ever since Stanley was like, sure, let him get married. I don't care."
For some reason, having Peter as a single guy, some people consider that to be like a defining trait for him. Personally, I don't think it matters so much.
I
But that's me.
My argument is that Peter being married is one of the things that makes him stand out because like Batman never got married like
Hmm.
for a long period of time in the comics. Superman didn't. All these other characters, Spider-Man would it adds another dimension to the realism of the character.
It gives him
Uh,
stakes.
it gives him stakes. It gives him stakes. Like I have a wife, and eventually, I they end up doing things to that poor child, but it's I have a kid that I'm gonna have. It adds more stakes to the character, and I think
For sure.
that's why when they did that Renew Your Vows story a couple years ago, people were like really into it because it's like, oh hey, it's Peter and Mary Jane, they're married again. It's like, hey, that's fun. Uh, but so they wanted to solve the problem of Peter, the problem, quote unquote, of Peter and MJ being married, which would eventually be solved by an even dumber solution in an episode that we'll be talking about later. Uh, and the other problem that they had was that they wanted to like essentially like do a continuity reboot and like try to simplify the character for new readers. And I guess that's sort of an idea that really comes out of American comics
Hmm.
and because if you have like something like Japanese manga or something like that, where it's like, where do you start? You start at issue one and you read everything.
The state of Spider-Man, especially at the time with 4 different like book runs, was just fucking impossible to get into if you weren't versed in it.
Yeah, with American comics, they're more about like the property and its like merchandising and like franchisement instead of with lots of Japanese comics where it's focused entirely on the creator, and if the creator is gone, the comic is over.
Mhm.
Uh, so because of that, if you want to start reading American comic books, it's like you have to pick what timeline you want to read in, or like what storylines you want to focus on. It's a whole goddamn mess. So that those two problems they wanted to solve, and so the idea of bringing in the clone from the '70s comic to replace, so like Peter and MJ could go off and have like their own little idyllic lives in suburbia or wherever, and the clone could come in as the quote unquote real Peter, and then you know have that new fresh continuity. It was sort of like killing two birds with one stone, except it was like trying to throw a grenade at a dove, but like you fucked up and you dropped the grenade at your feet instead of throwing it at the dove, and you blew yourself up.
Yeah, it was a fumble for the ages.
Yes.
Despite Spider-Man's efforts to stop this apparent imposter Peter Parker, he has comparable spider powers to the costumed one, and he's a little rusty with the abilities, but he's very much not just like some guy pretending to be Peter, apparently right off the bat. Spider-Man does ultimately knock his double here into a nearby warehouse where the fight continues. Very convenient. All the while, the double is trying to talk sense into Spider-Man, calling him by name, which angers and further pisses him off into a blind rage that they continue to fight through. We cut from this to the Ravencroft Institute, which is going to be a huge set piece for the rest of these four stories specifically, where we find Dr. Kafka and John Jameson welcoming the arrival of the famous psychiatrist and psychologist Judas Traveler and his associates.
These are like the most '90s looking characters I've ever seen in
For
my entire
sure.
life.
Judas absolutely looks like he has a van. He looks like the wizard on the van, airbrushed, that he owns, probably.
Like
Uh,
like Judas, like first of all, the name Judas Traveler is stupid.
oh, yeah.
It's like somebody's like terrible band from the '90s that they had where they played like the college bar circuit.
hmm
Uh,
it's
and all the characters look like the worst kind of like Rob Liefeld, Tom McFarlane, like just
badass 90s.
absolute epic badass '90s like gunk that like is absolutely incredibly terrible and looks way out of place when you put it with a character like Spider-Man that was designed in the 1960s and essentially hasn't been changed very
Yeah.
much because that's already a perfect design.
These characters are a big part of the problem people have with the Clone Saga as a whole. Judas Traveler's introduced here, and he pops up a little bit here and there throughout it, but they don't know what to do with him ever. He has
And
no.
they don't really explain what he is. Is he like a wizard? He like has all kinds of like
Yeah,
weird magic powers,
he has
but
like
like
Dr. Orpheus powers, and
yeah,
he
they
uses
don't
them and fucks off at the end.
they don't explain like if what how he got these magic powers. He's just a guy named Judas Traveler, who looks like a side character on Buffy that just
Yeah,
shows up and
he's
then
like
like does some
evil
weird
Edgar Winter.
Yeah, he looks like evil Edgar Winter. He shows up and he does weird magic shit and then he leaves and then that's the comic. And it's not good.
He shows up with his students, Chakra, Boone, Mr. Nacht, German for night, and Medea. Just his little cavalcade of badass '90s gunk characters,
It's just
um,
terrible.
who are taken on a tour of the facility. Um, we cut back to the New York City fight we're having here, where Spider-Man continues attacking his apparent imposter. He's convinced he's some kind of artificial construct of some kind because this Peter doesn't set off his spider sense. That's a big deal. Um, he takes some pause here, wondering why this other Peter is so interested in visiting Aunt May in the hospital, which gives the double an opportunity to pull off the mask from the original and explain that he is the clone from that '70s story all that time ago. Realizing this is the pawn of the Jackal, the original Peter is angered and renews his attack on the clone, who proceeds to try to further convince the original Peter that his days as Miles Warren's pawn are long over. He attempts to knock Spider-Man out, saying he wants to be long gone by the time Peter wakes up.
He was just really aggro this whole set of like 4 issues. He's like super aggro, and I don't know
Oh,
why.
absolutely.
I'm sure there's obviously backstory of like why he's like this for the previous issues, but just like reading this on its own, like as the start of a big comic event, like I don't understand the main character's mindset. It's like, this is bad.
Yeah, you caught him on a bad fucking day. By this point, Kafka's tour of Ravencroft is over, and she leaves Judas Traveler and his students at the library to begin their work, whatever that may be. Having seen the facility, Traveler is satisfied that this will suit his needs for his ultimate experiment. Walking through one of the walls, he ends up in a cell occupied by the Chameleon and remarks over his catatonic state, the result of a recent defeat at the hands of Spider-Man. Really, God, that's a cool little moment, I think. His face changing and stuff.
Yeah, the face changing doesn't come until I think the next issue.
Oh, yeah.
But
I
yeah,
have it in my notes that, oh, hey, Chameleon's here.
Yeah, Chameleon's cool.
He next goes into Shriek's cell, where she attempts to attack Judas. However, he subdues her easily, sees the rage and pain that she's attempting to drown out with, murderous thoughts about Spider-Man, and continues to another cell where he confronts Carnage, who is simply interested in starting a fight.
Carnage, another character from the 90s that I don't really like.
Yeah, a lot of people either love or hate Carnage. I'm pretty ambivalent towards him. More symbiotes.
I've never like I haven't read a whole lot of Carnage stories, but just the general concept of Carnage irks me because Carnage only exists because they fucked up Venom by making him an anti-hero. And so they're like, oh shit, we have to make like another evil symbiote. Let's make him like a crazy serial killer. There we go. That we can't redeem him.
And there's potential there. I just think they kind of squandered it with him.
I think it's just a stupid concept on its face.
Yeah, to each their own. Judas is able to separate Cletus from his symbiote with a mere hand gesture, and is surprised to see, this yet another criminally insane individual whose life has been shaped and altered and taken over by hatred for Spider-Man. With this, he telepathically commands his students to put their plan into action in the hopes of drawing Spider-Man to their location. With that, Chakra astral projects and sends like a ghostly vision of herself to contact Spider-Man, while Boone goes outside to prepare for his arrival. In the security control room, Medea knocks out John Jameson, while Mr. Nock takes control of the facility's security. Judas then enters Kafka's office and uses his powers to knock out Ashley, Kafka, and her assistant Edward Wieland, who you might be somewhat familiar with from past episodes. We'll get to him in a bit.
Get to him.
At that moment, Spider-Man wakes up to discover that his clone is gone. He puts his mask back on and is confronted by that astral projection from Chakra, who warns Spider-Man that Judas Traveler has taken over the Ravencroft Institute, and tells him that if he chooses to do nothing, Traveler will kill everyone inside the facility. However, if Spider-Man manages to defeat Traveler, he will release all the prisoners upon society. Kind of a no-win situation. As Spider-Man,
it's an interesting dilemma that they put here, but I just don't really utilize it very well.
Yeah, and I thought to myself, it must be really convenient for Peter this time. He doesn't have to listen to a police radio. He doesn't catch them. It's just a ghost that comes to him and says, "Hey, shit's fucked."
The ghost of plot propulsion.
It's convenient, if anything. As Spider-Man swings off for Ravencroft, the clone emerges from the shadows. He fears that Spider-Man is in no shape to face this danger alone and digs out an old Spider-Man costume he just has that he doesn't want to use. He puts on the mask and gloves anyway over his cool guy jacket. I have a jacket a lot like that, and it makes me not want to wear it. She is joined. MJ, sorry, is on the street across from the hospital, watching over Aunt May. She's joined by Aunt Anna, who came up from Florida after hearing the news of May's stroke. Um, when Anna asks MJ where Peter is, she struggles to give an answer to where he is and what is going on in his life at this time. From there, Spider-Man arrives at the Ravencroft Institute to find a strange psychic barrier erected around it. Not only are the authorities on the scene, but Spider-Man is there to, give relief, and is relieved to discover that Kafka and her staff were also released, not killed. With the wall crawler on the scene, Judas appears before them, and authorities open fire on him, with Traveler merely shrugging off the bullets. He reissues his challenge to Spider-Man, reminding him that if he does nothing at all, the prisoners in the facility will be killed. Unwilling to allow anyone to die, Spider-Man accepts Traveler's offer and enters the Ravencroft Institute, capping off this issue. And taking us to The Amazing Spider-Man 394 in the second part of the story.
Which I said earlier is probably my favorite of this because it's written by our good buddy James DeMatteis. And you can really tell there's lots of really good caption boxes like in Craven's Last Hunt, and it's a lot of like theatrical dialogue and things like that. I think the reason that I like DeMatteis's writing so much is because it reminds me of sort of the general theatricality that Stan Lee had a lot when he wrote
Mhm.
Spider-Man, that sort of that grandiosity.
Very introspective, too.
Yes. That's also a thing that Stan Lee did a lot in the original Lee Ditko run. And I think that DeMatteis carries that flag well.
Oh, yeah, his fingerprints are all over this in the best possible way. In New York City, the clone of Peter is looking down on the city from the rooftops with a mind full of memories that he knows are not his, but those of the original Peter Parker. He believes that he's nothing more than a fraud and refuses to leave the bedside of May Parker, Peter's aunt, who is in a stroke coma, a comic coma. They are indefinite and the worst. Meanwhile, across town, authorities have gathered all around the Ravencroft Institute after it's been surrounded by that impenetrable force field from Judas Traveler. They do a lot of that kind of catching up from the previous issue and these like interconnected cross-book runs. Dr. Kafka and John Jameson, the head of Ravencroft security, are all gathered outside. Kafka is afraid, considering the facility is filled with superpowered criminals, and it appears that the staff was teleported outside of the facility. That's when she realizes her assistant Edward Wieland is not with them. He's inside, where Judas has him by the throat, assuring him not to be afraid. He demonstrates to his assistants Chakra and Mr. Noct that this is yet another example of the monsters that hide within humanity and eventually erode their way to the surface. He mentally probes Edward and causes him to transform into his alter ego Vermin again. In a this is pre Craven's Last Hunt, this story. But I guess
No,
Dematis. Oh, is it
it's post
post?
Craven's Last. Yeah, I
Oh,
mean this
okay.
Craven's Last Hunt came out in 1987. This was
Oh,
like
that's
the
right.
94.
You're right. You're right. I had it in my head as I had my dates mixed up for some reason. No, this is very much post Craven's Last Hunt. Thank you. Uh, I don't know how I think I had it in my head as this was issue 117 when I was looking at it from being Web of Spider-Man 117. But
Yeah.
no, you're right. Yes, this is post there. So I guess Dematis just has an affinity for Vermin. I He just likes the guy, I guess.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then like Traveler, like so he turns him into Vermin again, and then Vermin like tries to attack Traveler, and then Traveler just goes sleep, and then makes him and then paralyzes him. That's like hard as fuck. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a good way to establish, a show not tell like level of power. He can just use the force on him, I guess. Use his Doom voice
That's like
on him.
the one cool Traveler moment is when he's just like sleep,
Fall to the ground,
go to
paralyzed.
go to bed.
Elsewhere in the facility, Spider-Man leaps through the complex searching for those responsible for the takeover. He does so wordlessly, as he's given up on being Peter Parker in order to embrace being the Spider. More Dematis, touches there. As he leaps through the facility, he remembers what brought him here, the warning from Chakra that if he did not come, Traveler would kill all the patients inside. He ruminates on this and his refusal to allow anyone to be murdered, even though Traveler had threatened to release the prisoners if they're spared. Unaware that his every move is being watched, he happens on the holding cell of the Chameleon, and this is the sequence where he remembers how his foe was responsible for the imposters posing as his parents recently. There was a weird little arc where he had like his parents come back as robots. That was real recent at the time of publication.
Oh yeah.
Even though he still has feelings of revenge, he sees how the chameleon is now completely insane and considers his job done in a real, okay, dark Peter moment.
Yeah, the chameleon moment is pretty spooky because he's like he doesn't he's like saying that chameleon doesn't like have any own identity of his own, and he's like constantly changing faces, and I think that that's really cool.
Yeah, it's a neat little sequence, driven to madness. He then turns and sees Carnage in his cell. Seeing someone completely lacking in morality causes Spider-Man to consider the pointlessness of everything, and in an attempt to clear his head, he scurries into another room to think. Meanwhile, at LaGuardia Airport, Mary Jane sits to board her plane to Pittsburgh so she can reconcile with her father and sister. When she hears the boarding call, MJ has cold feet and wants to go back to care for May and wait for Peter, but is stopped by Aunt Anna, who is unhappy with the fact that Peter has abandoned his wife and aunt during these troubled times. However, she insists that MJ go and visit her family, assuring MJ that she will call if there's any news about May's condition, which in turn convinces MJ to go, saying she'll call as soon as she reaches her sister Gail's place. Anna assures her niece that everything is going to be okay, but as soon as the plane takes off for Pittsburgh, she begins crying. While at the hospital in Forest Hills, the clone of Peter is watching over May's bed, fighting with the implanted memories and feelings coursing through his mind, and talking to himself out loud, pacing around a lot. He fears about what will happen to May and cries at her bedside when he's interrupted by a doctor, Julia Caputo. Mistaking the clone for the real Peter, she thinks Peter could use a friend, which is a very nice sentiment to the troubled clone. Good little scene there. Back at Ravencroft, Spider-Man continues to venture deeper into the facility. The entire time, he's being stalked by a man known as Scryer. Scryer is another one of the nothing characters that's introduced here. I've read up a little on him because I don't know a ton about him, and apparently he's like an entire cult of people that like share this identity, and the entire cult is him. It's
Shut
stupid.
up.
It's just more dumb bullshit. I
I
don't give
hate
a shit
comic
about
books.
him. He's just big scary white man. Sensing the mysterious figure with a spider sense, an increasingly paranoid Spider-Man calls out to this guy to show himself. Rushing down a hallway, Spider-Man is blinded by a light coming through a doorway and goes to investigate it. When he gets close, the hand of Judas Traveler smashes through the glass and grabs him by the throat. Judas decides to look into Spider-Man's mind to see what he can find there and just begins to laugh. This angers Spider-Man, who begins to strike at Judas, insisting that he, stop this show, this charade of whatever is going on here. Unaffected by the blows, Traveler agrees that Spider-Man is indeed a man, albeit a broken one. Accepting this, Spider-Man crumples to a withered pile on the floor, feebly calling out to those that he's ever loved in a really pathetic little moment that I like. I don't know. It's interesting to see him broken on the floor like that, just mentally,
Yeah, it's interesting.
not even that beaten, just done. Scryer asks Judas what the next phase of the plan is, while Spider-Man passes out on the ground. Judas tells his ally they're not quite done yet, as when he probed Spider-Man's mind, he discovered that there is another. Moments later at the hospital, the clone wakes up to his spider sense, warning him of a coming danger. He is then confronted by the astral form of Chakra, ghosting to him again, offering him a choice. Luckily, Aunt May is passed out in a coma. Stay here and let the true Spider-Man die, and you can usurp his life. Or come to Ravencroft and rescue him, the man that you were just a mere shell of, that you, for all intents and purposes, should hate. As this offer is being made, Spider-Man is being restrained and placed in one of the cells of Ravencroft. When he wakes up, he begins screaming, all chained up, taking us to the halfway point of what we're covering today, moving on to Spider-Man number 51. I hope you liked good writing, because we're not going to see much more of it.
Nope.
The Peter Parker clone is standing over the unconscious body of May Parker, wishing that she could hear him. Saying way too much out loud, he tells her that he's not really her nephew, but a clone calling himself Ben Reilly, after his memory of Uncle Ben and May's maiden name. That he had
Nice
met the
name.
real... What's that?
I just said, nice name.
Yeah, it's better than Petor, or like... There was a part in... I don't know how familiar you are with the Star Wars expanded universe, but there's a point in the Thrawn trilogy...
Luke with 2 U's?
Yeah, Luke.
Luke.
We could have gotten Peter with 2 E's, or 2
Peter.
T's. Peter Parker with 2 A's. He tells May he had met the real Peter and it hadn't gone over very well. Moments earlier, he was visited by Chakra and had his ultimatum laid out before him. He has to save Spider-Man's life or do nothing and take it over. However, even though he is a clone, his memories are the same as Peter's. As such, he believes that May raised them both, convincing him of what he needs to do. He pulls a Spider-Man mask and gloves out of his bag and decides to go to Ravencroft and save Spider-Man's life. Not long after he's left, the nursing station gets an alert that May Parker is flatlining. Her doctor rushes into the hospital room and discovers that May is still alive, but a cable from the heart monitor came loose. As they reconnect it, they notice that quote-unquote Peter is no longer in the room and nobody saw him leave. Ooh. I like little Spider-Man moments like that. I know they're silly, but it's
Yeah,
neat.
they're fun. That was one of the few notes I had for this issue was I liked the little monologue in front of May where he's talking about the brooding. I like the brooding that was in the last issue too from Ben. And then the little moment's fun. I always like when they do that.
From that moment, the spider clone is swinging across the city, realizing he can't resist playing hero. He wonders if he'll die this time around and finally put his suffering to an end in a nice little emo monologue. While at Ravencroft, Judas Traveler watches Spider-Man from his cell and is unimpressed with what he's seeing. He's joined by his assistant Mr. Noct, who informs him that Chakra contacted the spider clone and he may be on his way. He tells Noct to go send out Boone and Medea to go outside and provide a suitable greeting for their guest. A short time later, the spider clone arrives outside Ravencroft and sees the psychic barrier around the institution. Although the barrier is keeping the authorities and the press away, Ben is surprised when he's able to pass through it untouched. On the other side, his spider sense warns him just in time to leap out of the way of a shot fired at him by Medea. She has some stupid little banter with Boone about how Spider-Man needs to be taken in alive and, stop trying to fucking murder him so much, or you're gonna get your shit wrecked by Judas. Back inside, Spider-Man struggles to get free so he can stop Traveler from killing or setting free the other inmates. However, Judas is still flooding his mind with images. In his mind, Spider-Man is caught in a massive web surrounded by various foes and loved ones. He tells them all to go away and leave him alone. That's when he's joined by a vision of his clone, who offers to help Spider-Man fight everyone off. Watching Spider-Man struggling with all of this in his mind, Traveler begins to wonder what kind of man Spider-Man really is. Meanwhile, Ben Reilly manages to slip past Medea and Boone and gets into the facility. However, his ability to escape doesn't last long as the pair come back inside and find him. As Ben continues to fight them, Spider-Man struggles with Traveler's invasive mind invasion. No matter what is thrown at him, Spider-Man continues to remind himself about the whole, great power, great responsibility deal. And as Ben manages to defeat his attackers and continue his hunt for Spider-Man, Spider-Man orders Traveler to get out of his mind and finally breaks free of his shackles physically, breaking out of the cell before he's quickly overpowered by Judas. However, that's when
is this the thing when he talks about the power and responsibility are mine that he talks about?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, the power and responsibility are mine, and I'm like, that's a good moment. And then Ben is like, no, they're ours, and I'm like, I'm gonna kill you.
Yeah, that's ours because I'm here, Ben Reilly. I've come here to fight.
My responsibility, even though it's
I've
not.
never had an uncle.
It's not my it's my responsibility, even though it's not. Yeah.
It's very much not. But thanks for your help. The pair vow to work together to defeat Traveler once and for all, ending this issue, and taking us to the penultimate part of this 4-issue arc, the Spectacular Spider-Man 217. Oh no, this is the final issue of this arc. Yeah, Spectacular 217. Having come to the Ravencroft Institute, he's now facing these two Spider-Men side by side. Traveler uses his powers to make both men lose consciousness. While outside, a barrier prevents the authorities and the press from seeing what's going on still. Among those gathered are Dr. Kafka. Wieland is outside, I think, now, right? With Jameson and them? I don't recall.
I don't care.
I don't recall or care, yeah.
I don't care.
No one in the gathering there understands why a renowned psychologist like Traveler would or could take control of the facility in the way he has. Likewise, they are concerned about Traveler's threats to kill the patients or unleash them on the public. Back inside, Judas has turned attention away from the Spider-Men to observe Cletus Cassidy, Carnage. He finds the symbiosis between the serial killer and the alien creature fascinating, but his observations are interrupted by Boone and Medea, who inform him that they have placed the Spider-Men in the basement. Judas instructs Mr. Knox to go and down to the basement and observe the experiment and take copious notes. That's when Scryer warns Judas that the barrier outside is pushing his magical powers to the limits. He then tells Chakra to release the prisoners, as he had never had any intention of ever killing them. When Spider-Man and Ben Reilly wake up in the basement, Spider-Man attacks the duplicate again, thinking that he's involved with Judas. Spider-Man thinks this is yet another ploy to drive him mad. He's suffering quite a bit of everybody wants me fucking dead and crazy PTSD.
I had a note earlier where it's like the shot where Ben is like helping up Spider-Man and like they're ready to fight together. It's like that was a cool shot. And then immediately at the beginning of 217, it's like, why are they fighting again? I thought they were buddies. It's like
You're with Judas, you piece of shit.
I hate this.
It's not the best writing, but it gets worse, I promise. Ben is desperately trying to convince Spider-Man otherwise, as when Spider-Man states that he had his powers back in junior high, Ben reminds him that Peter didn't get his powers until high school, in a fun little bit of continuity. It just pisses Peter off further, who tells the clone to stop calling him Peter, insisting that he is only Spider-Man. Ben wonders what's wrong with Spider-Man, who has a grimmer and darker attitude than the clone remembers. But before he can get any answers, a group of Ravencroft inmates come crashing into the room. When Spider-Man savagely starts beating them, not quite pulling his punches as much as he usually does, it seems, Ben pulls him away and attempts to remind the wall crawler that he's a hero, but Spider-Man tells the clone he has no idea what tragedies he's recently endured. Ben tells Spider-Man that if the life that Peter Parker leads is so painful, he will gladly take the reins of it from him. When Spider-Man refuses, Ben begs Spider-Man to work with him to get the situation under control his way. Hearing this, Mr. Noct returns upstairs to tell Judas Traveler that the spiders are now working together in an alliance. That's when Medea
But the spiders are collaborating.
Have you seen that episode of Always Sunny with Country Mac where he joins them and he's like, Jesus Christ, there's two of them.
Yeah, it's like that. I've only seen one episode of Always Sunny, but I've seen that image before.
Yeah. That's when Medea asks if she can eliminate them, but Judas barks at her to be silent. That's when Chakra enters the room with an envelope she found that was postmarked from a week ago. Judas
How about a week ago?
It's been. Judas explains that it's yet another deception integral to the game that they play. With time growing short, Traveler tells Scryer to shut down the force field and that the rest need to prepare for their imminent departure. Outside, Kafka and the others witness as the energy barrier goes down. They're then overwhelmed with knockout gas, making everyone fall asleep. Meanwhile, MJ's on her flight to Pittsburgh to visit her family. During the flight, she's recognized by her seatmate from her role on the soap opera Secret Hospital. And as she keeps up her end of the conversation, she can't help but worry about everything Peter is going through. Suddenly, she feels the strong urge to vomit and rushes to the bathroom to throw up. Back at Ravencroft, the two Spider-Men are having to fight off the gang of inmates that ambushed them. Running upstairs to get out of the basement, they are barred by a lunatic named Wild Whip.
What?
Wild Whip. That's his name.
I don't know if I'm assuming this is a character that has shown up before in the comics.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's somebody Ben fought during his exile.
this is stupid.
Hmm. He's no big wheel. I'll give him that.
No, he's no Big Wheel. We should have had
When
Big Wheel in here.
when Ben Riley recognizes the villain, Spider-Man realizes that his clone operated as a hero in his past. Ben admits that there were some momentary exceptions to his self-imposed exile, and there are a handful of comics that do delve into those lost years. I think they're pretty dumb. I really don't like the art, and I like the writing even less, so I can't say I recommend them.
Are you
Um,
telling me that a Clone Saga comic is dumb?
Believe it or not, I am. This is truly the attack of the clones and of the franchise in
Insanity.
more than one way. Although they're ambushed, the pair manage to knock out Wild Whip, but not before Ben notices how out of practice he is. At the
Wild
top of
Whip.
the at the top of the stairs, they find Carnage waiting for them, and at that
Stupid name.
moment, Judas travels.
Wild Whip.
Yeah, I didn't remember that was his name until like at the end they say it, and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me right now?
Like when I was reading this issue, because most of it is like kind of boring fight scenes, my eyes were so glazed over that I didn't even really think about the name Wild Whip until you brought it up again.
Nobody like workshopped that with him. He said, "I'm Wild Whip," and nobody said, "You want to rethink that one, Doug?" It's just okay. He's Wild Whip. Um, Judas Traveler leaves a letter in Kafka's office, finishing the scheme that he and his allies had set in motion before leaving. Back downstairs, Ben points out that they can't let Carnage get past them because he's going to murder other inmates, and has claimed to already have done so. This moment of mercy begins to make Spider-Man remember everything he used to stand for. Working together, the two Spider-Men manage to knock Carnage out very quickly and with little trouble. They just kick him in the face together, and he's knocked out.
It's that easy.
That's Carnage's weakness, is being kicked in the face by 2 to 4 feet.
That's why Spider-Man had to team up with Venom and Maximum Carnage,
Yeah.
so he can do
As
the
they
double kick move.
As they rush upstairs, the pair begin to trade quips as Spider-Man begins to lighten up. Spotting Traveler and his minions making their escape, they rush outside. Spider-Man goes after Judas. His clone has a bone to pick with Boone and Medea. However, when Ben leaps inside their getaway vehicle, he discovers there's nobody inside. Suddenly, the car explodes, apparently killing the clone. Rushing inside to face Judas Traveler, very nonplussed by this. He just kind of goes like, "Oh no, my clone is dead. Oh well," and then just goes inside. He's not like perturbed
Okay.
by this at all. Spider-Man fails to stop his foe, who makes him pass out with another hypnotic suggestion. By this point, Kafka and the co-workers wake up and rush inside to find Spider-Man blacked out on the floor. The prisoners are contained again, and they're beginning to make sense of the encounter. I'm glad somebody is. That's when Edward finds a note from Judas Traveler, postmarked
Jonas
from a week
Traveler.
before. Opening up the note, they discover a letter from Traveler stating he couldn't make it to his scheduled appearance. Falling for this, they wonder who the man they faced really was. At that moment, Traveler and his minions are driving away in a limo.
What was the point of that? What was the point of like just trying to draw attention away from him?
I don't think they knew what they wanted to do with him as they were writing him, to be honest. He has
No,
nothing to do
clearly,
for most of the time he's there.
even from just these 5 issues from the Clone Saga that I read, I can already tell that most of this was just like shit that was made up on the fly, and it's probably the reason why it ended up going on for 2 years.
Yeah. Inside the car, Judas congratulates them on a job well done, which I guess you could call it that. As Spider-Man appears to be returning to his previous value system, the arrival of the clone has intrigued Traveler as well, who notes that both figures need further observation. Back at Ravencroft, the authorities search the wreckage of the car, and they find no trace of a body inside. This leaves Spider-Man wondering if this was yet another manipulation created by Traveler. More confused than ever, Spider-Man swings off to figure it out. Meanwhile, not far away, Ben Riley is alive and well. He managed to leap out of the car before the explosion, but faked his death. He wonders what to do next, whether to remain in New York City or to continue going north in his self-appointed exile, ending the Power and Responsibility arc, and bringing us to the final issue that we're going to discuss in depth today, Web of Spider-Man 118, which comes
Wait,
directly
shut up.
after...
Shut
What's
up.
up?
I've fucking on the Marvel wiki, and apparently this comic book, the comic book that we just covered, is the
Oh,
only appearance in history of Wild Whip.
God! Not even in anything else ever.
No, this is the literally you just go to the page and it says Wild Whip only appearance.
I'm officially the biggest Wild Whip fan in the world now.
Dude, fucking Wild Whip.
Do you think he'll be in No Way Home?
God, I wish Wild Whip would like Wild. We need to make like fuck, bringing back all the old characters for a new Sinister Six. It should be like Big
Big Wheel,
Wheel
Wild
and
Whip.
Wild Whip, uh, and like one of the guys who steals all the Hostess fruit pies.
That's great. We just gotta find the other three.
That should be
Jesus
the new
Christ,
Sinister
I
Six.
can't believe
The
it.
leader should be Wild Whip.
That's so great. Oh my god. And how did he just had the whip in the Institute, I guess.
Yeah,
Whatever.
he just had his laser lash.
His patented classic iconic laser lash.
Abilities skilled in the use of a whip.
God damn. Thank you, Clone Saga. Web of
Wild
Spider-Man
Whip.
118 is the proper introductory issue of Ben Reilly as the Scarlet Spider. Ben Reilly, alive and in a weird I'm on my way out of New York exile, goes to the spider exhibit at the Museum of Natural History, cannot get his mind off of the fact that he's a clone. He sees himself as a soulless creature that with more in common with the exhibits at the museum than he does with real people. He also
Bro, I get it. You think you're a freak. Fucking calm down. Eat a pizza.
You poor, handsome, tall bastard with a rugged jawline and muscles and superpowers. Oh no.
Bro,
Uh,
literally, who cares?
he struggles with his memories that don't belong to him, but Peter Parker. As he leaves the museum, he's upset by seeing anything that reminds him of Spider-Man, particularly a hooded sweatshirt with a spider emblem on it in a shop window. He then sees a man trying to hold up a hot dog vendor who's about to get involved when some police officers bust the man. Although he has once more avoided a conflict, Ben Reilly still cannot shake the altruism in his nature that was told to him by Peter with all those many years ago. With great power comes great responsibility, all that, humdrum. While on the Upper West Side, Venom has returned to New York City after a prolonged absence. He returned to the city after hearing about the recent siege on the Ravencroft Institute by Judith Traveler. This has particularly bothered him because his quote-unquote son, Carnage, has been incarcerated at Ravencroft, and Venom made the serial killer his responsibility. His attention is turned to a police chase on the street below. Seeing the criminals open fire on the officers, Venom swoops in and delivers the drivers into the nearby river. Although Venom stopped the chase with a bunch of quips as well, the officers on the scene try to open fire on Venom. The bullets do no harm, they just are absorbed by the symbiote while he swings away. As he's going across the city, Venom suddenly finds himself in front of the apartment building where Jean DeWolf was shot, the event that set into motion his transformation into Venom. It also brings memories of his recent clashes with Carnage and Shriek. However, when a police car spots him, Venom decides to leave and put his old ghost to rest. Meanwhile,
I think we've already passed a couple of these moments. I was just so like glazed over from this discussion. The first thing was like when Ben is in the museum and he like sees the hoodie, like that's a pretty dope hoodie. I would buy that.
I think so too. Yeah, the
And
off-center asymmetrical spider. I've always thought it was pretty cool.
and the other thing, there's always that eternal question of like, is Ben the clone or is Peter who's really the clone? You already know that Ben is the clone because he's wearing a Yankees cap when we all know that the real Peter Parker is a Mets fan.
The Mets, baby.
This is canon. It's canon that Peter is a Mets fan. We all know this.
Mm-hmm. So you got him twisted then.
But yeah, I like this. I actually kind of like this issue because it's mostly just a lot of internal monologue and Ben and Venom just kind of hitting the nostalgia circuit.
No, it serves as a great introductory issue for the character, like in a debut set stage kind of thing.
It should have been that
Uh,
instead of whatever the fuck the last 4 issues were.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, at a Forest Hills hospital, Anna Watson visits with her friend May Parker, who has been in a coma since suffering a stroke. Her silent vigil is interrupted by the arrival of Betty Brant, whose arrival is a welcome surprise for Anna. Outside the window, Ben Riley sits and waits for the two women to leave so he can spend his time with May. He's surprised at how much Betty Brant has changed since she and Peter Parker briefly dated. Unaware that she's being watched, Betty feels guilty for not spending more time with the Parkers and how it took the deaths of both Nick Katzenberg and Lance Bannon to make her realize how short life is. She
Who?
thinks, yeah, some people. And she then sees something moving out the window, but Ben manages to leap out of view before Betty could identify what it was. This causes Ben Riley to think how things could have gone if Peter Parker's life had went in a different direction. His thoughts of the past lead him to the ruins of the Acme warehouse in a great little flashback sequence. This makes him think about the night that Peter Parker went after Uncle Ben's killer as Spider-Man. How Peter's failure to stop the burglar nights earlier had led to his uncle's murder. I really, really like the recreation of those panels with like the kind of sepia tone on them, the
Yep.
old costume, all that.
It's a good moment.
Meanwhile, Venom has returned to the church where he first found his alien symbiote in a mirror of what is going on with Peter. He thinks about how Cletus Cassidy's symbiote is his responsibility to destroy. He is, however, conflicted because killing the Carnage symbiote would be like killing part of himself. Troubled by the memories that the church stir up, the Venom quickly leaves, unaware of the fact that he's been spotted by a reporter looking to get an exclusive about Venom's return to New York. By this point, Ben Riley has arrived at the Brooklyn Bridge, where he is reliving the memories of the day Gwen Stacy was murdered by the Green Goblin. His thoughts of the tragedy are interrupted when his spider sense detects someone on a parapet across from him. He spots a woman just as she is about to commit suicide leaping off of the bridge. Not wanting to see a history repeat, Riley puts on his web shooters and swings down, rescuing the woman before she can hit the water. He then rushes her to a nearby hospital, but leaves before the doctor can get a statement from him. And another little, ooh, Ben Riley moment.
I think this whole idea of Ben wanting to like leave New York, but he just keeps getting pulled into like new uh, opportunities to like be a hero and save people. I think that's like an interesting story concept, and it's probably the reason why this is the other issue that I like.
Yeah, no, I also enjoy this one the most besides the Dematis issue. It's especially the ending. It is another part one of a four-part arc, but this is the one that matters.
Yeah.
Um, Ben is on a rooftop thinking about what he needs to do next with his life. That's when he overhears a radio report about Venom's return into New York City. Having heard about Venom in the news, he wonders why Spider-Man never took the Maniac down and decides that he's going to do something about it. After a quick stop at the museum gift shop, Ben Riley returns to his newly rented apartment where he puts together a new costume, including a full red bodysuit and mask with the ripped hoodie on top of it, the spider emblem and all. He's satisfied with his new costume and its goofy ankle leather pouches, so he leaps out, determined to take down Venom once and for all, which is the end of the issue.
We get the classic Scarlet Spider costume, which I don't like.
I like it a lot. It is super goofy. I think the bodysuit looks awful in real life. It's a really hard costume to cosplay. Uh, I don't know what it is about it. It's super goofy and stupid. It's got giant web shooters on the wrist, like a tube of web shooters all the way around it.
The exposed web shooter is like the one part I like of this costume. The rest of it to me is just like way too 90s with like the ripped hoodie
I know.
and
That's what I love
the
about it.
and the red bodysuit just kind of looks bad, especially the eyes, I think, where it's just
Oh
all
yeah.
white. It
Oh yeah.
reminds me of the black suit, but like shitty. But
I admittedly I
the
do like it a lot.
the current costume that Ben uses, Ben is like back in the comics as Spider-Man doing Spider-Man stuff, and he has a fucking his costume that he uses right now is like hard as hell. I love it.
Mhm.
I
I'm
put it in
glad
the
it
chat.
evolved. Yeah, that one is really really neat. Yeah. It's
It looks sick
better.
as fuck.
It's separate enough from Spider-Man to be distinct, and it's not as over the top as the '90s one. I think the '90s one is iconic and emblematic.
It's iconic, and it's I'm never mad if it's like in like a video game or something,
Oh, sure,
but
yeah.
it just to me it's like
It is incredibly
it's very
goofy.
much it's dated. It hasn't really aged very well in my opinion.
Precisely. It's a product of its time. As a matter of fact, the retro wave release Scarlet Spider is the only Marvel Legends figure I own. I think it's goofy. I love it. It's on my desk. I'm looking at it right now. I think it was interesting the way they kind of adapted it with the Homecoming suit, with the inversion of it. But
Yeah,
it's not a suit that looks good in real life.
I think yeah, my main problem with it is because the colors are inversed. It's like that's not how it should look.
But yeah, that is
And
uh those are our comics.
that's yeah, that's it. Alex, we're not going to immediately jump into fun facts because Alex has to briefly explain to me what the fuck else happens in this storyline.
Just the most glancing overview I can give you to hit the notes of what happens. I'm gonna stop it just about before we get to what they call maximum clonage because that is
Oh
it's
my
like a whole
god.
separate thing. But the rest of the
What the
clone,
hell is maximum clonage?
I don't know a ton about it myself, but I know that there's even more clones in it. It's
Oh
stupid.
no.
But the Clone Saga, from the time Ben is introduced, like we've talked about, beginning from June '94, the Spider-Man books consisted of, at the time, Web of Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, Spider-Man, and Spectacular Spider-Man. There was also the quarterly Spider-Man Unlimited. That's where the Mystery Man plotline started before the issues that we just read here. Ben takes over the mantle of the Scarlet Spider, and after he arrives, a mentally unstable man named Kane shows up and challenges the two Spider-Men to a fight.
Oh,
Kane
not
reveals
Kane.
that
Oh my god.
Kane reveals that he was the result of the Jackal's first attempt at cloning Spider-Man. Something went awry in the cloning process, and he developed a degenerative disease that gave him like a Freddy Krueger face. His
Okay.
powers are the logical extremes of what Peter's can go to. For example, he was much stronger, and instead of a spider sense to warn him of danger, he had like fucked up horror movie precognitive flashes. He also had a physical touch ability called the Mark of Cain, kind of like a proto Miles Venom strike. He would leave like a burning handprint on your face, which like bubbled your flesh and made you look all fucked up, which was like a logical extension of Peter's like wall crawling. It was like a hand touch power. I don't know. It would cause a large black mark to appear on your face. And he also had to wear like a not quite like a Colonel Jupiter suit, but like a special scientific suit to keep him like alive and stave off his disease. He had a whole complex where he hated Ben Riley and wanted to protect Peter Parker because of his like programming from the Jackal. Working together, Spider-Man and the Scarlet Spider were eventually able to defeat Kane. Deciding they needed to investigate further, they revisit the Jackal's old lab, and however, to their great surprise, he's alive. Somehow, for whatever reason, instead of dying, he spent the 5 years since the clone had originally popped up in comic book time in a regenerative pod so he could look like a mutated man jackal thing. If you look him up from this time, he just straight up looks like the Joker. It's really not great. Uh, he went from sad little scientist with a crush on Gwen Stacy to mad scientist with a crush on Gwen Stacy, who also wants to kill the human race and replace all of them with genetically superior clones. So it's kind of a Amazing Spider-Man movie lizard motivation. He wants everyone to be a fucked up genetic freak like him,
My
Steiner
brain is
style.
turning into like a milkshake right now.
He explains that the time bomb actually killed a clone of himself while he had lived on to continue his experiments. Now ready to inflict the degenerative virus on the populace, he began to put his plan into motion and commands a third Spider-Man clone named Spider-Side to keep Spider-Man, Scarlet Spider, and Kane at bay.
What?
Fortunately, they were able to defeat Spider-Side and stop Warren's mad scheme.
Did they get Wild Whip involved?
Wild Whip is actually the 0th clone of Spider-Man.
Wild Whip is the 7th clone of Spider-Man.
He's Dick Parker.
He's Dick Parker.
Before escaping, Jackal reveals that Ben Riley was actually the original Spider-Man and Peter Parker is the clone. After conducting their own genetic test, Peter
I
and
don't know.
Ben realized
I don't really have to say how stupid that is because that's really stupid.
it's incredibly stupid. It was meant as a way, like we've talked about, it was meant as an escape rope to try to give MJ and Peter their own story and have Ben become Spider-Man. Huge fan backlash. Nobody liked this choice. I don't like this choice either.
No, it's a terrible
Um,
idea.
Peter and Ben realize that what he said was true, and they're forced to rethink their lives. Peter is particularly distraught over this. This is where we get the infamous Mary Jane smack during the revelation.
I'm sorry,
Uh,
what?
there's a moment in his like distress where MJ like goes to comfort him, and he like brushes her off really hard and accidentally like flings her across the room. It's a
Like
really
Spider-Man
infamous
3 when he
panel.
smacks
Yeah,
her?
pretty much. Yeah,
Oh
like
my god.
it's a real like what the fuck moment.
Dude, this
Ben
sounds fucking terrible.
Ben feels that he has stolen Peter's life and decides to stop being Spider-Man. Ben's stolen the life. Peter decides to stop being Spider-Man, and he moves to Portland with MJ to start a more humble life. She's also
He moves up to Portland.
this is give or take around the same time that they were toying with revealing that MJ was pregnant too. With him now gone, Ben moves to New York permanently to become Spider-Man. This
And
becomes
then
the status quo for close to a year.
we get the dope Ben Reilly Spider-Man suit that I love so much.
However, when Jackal reappears, Peter moves back to New York and works with Ben to investigate. Eventually, they find the criminal and have another explosive battle. However, they would experience a huge shock when the long thought dead Norman Osborn reveals himself and explains that he had secretly been manipulating the events all along. He
Oh,
tells them
Norman, I can't stay mad at you.
he tells them he had switched the test results and that Peter was really the original Spider-Man and Ben is the clone. At first, they're not sure if they should believe the Green Goblin. However, after a climactic battle with the criminal, Ben is stabbed by the Goblin's glider and dies. As he
Dude.
breathes his last breath, his body disintegrates, succumbing to a degenerative genetic disorder that all of the clones suffered from, proving without a shadow of a doubt that Peter is the original, and after defeating Norman, he returns as the one and only Spider-Man.
Does MJ just like still live in Portland?
I think she came with. I think it was like a "we need to be back even temporarily" kind of thing.
I
But
think
that is give or take the end of what the greater Clone Saga is considered to be.
and like don't they make MJ have like a miscarriage or like have the baby die in birth, like childbirth?
Something like that, if I remember correctly. I do have a bit of trivia about that as well.
Oh my god, this is like the stupidest thing ever.
Yeah, there's bits.
I mean,
of it
I love to see a classic Norman Osborn pulling this. Like, I hate the Star Wars prequels because they treat Emperor Palpatine as like this like super duper mastermind who always knows what's going on and pulls all the strings secretly. And I hate it in that, but I kind of love when Norman Osborn does it because Norman Osborn is just a silly little guy.
Yeah. I think a lot of the drive to make Norman the guy that was behind it all stemmed from the idea of people hating Traveler as a new villain. But past that, when Kane was introduced, I want to say he killed Doctor Octopus at some point, and a lot of people were like, "How are you going to have this new guy you're going to have around for so little time kill an OG like that?" So I guess they wanted to redeem themselves for that too by having Storm and Norman be behind everything. I don't know.
So they killed Doc Ock. I obviously he came back.
Oh yeah, everyone comes back. Ben Riley himself comes back eventually.
Multiple times. Ben Reilly dies and comes back to life multiple times.
It's just a thing, but
I
that
feel
is
like
where
I feel like the only person in the mainline Spider-Man comics that hasn't died and come back to life is Spider-Man.
yeah, pretty much they've just
Because
faked it out with it a few times.
he dies in the Ultimate Comics. That's why Miles shows up. But then there's a Peter clone that shows up in the Ultimate Comics.
Yep. And Ultimate itself has its own Clone Saga thing that is not great. It's pretty stupid.
I've heard of that. I know that like the Spider Woman in Ultimate Universe is a female clone of Peter. The moral of the story is here. Before we go into the fun facts, the moral of the story here is that clones are stupid. Don't make stories with clones in them.
Yeah, it's an idea that almost always does not translate from the idea stage to the final good product stage. Be it Star Wars, be it Spider-Man, clones just tend to muddy things up. I say this as a Clone Wars apologist, but I'm talking in the broader sense of like the film Attack of the Clones and stuff like that.
Yeah, like
If you're
that's like, as much as I shit on, as much as I fucking hate the Star Wars prequels, the idea of the Clone Wars is an interesting concept, and I think it works.
there just needs to be a tremendous more amount of thought behind it than what we've got with both of with this essentially. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Alex, before we go too far into, like, giving our own final thoughts on this, Alex, what are your fun facts for the Clone Saga?
I've got some fun facts and some could have beens. At one point in the writing cycle, there was no clone, and in fact,
What?
Peter and Ben were the same person caught in a stable time loop.
What
Uh,
the fuck?
the writing team found that this went against multiple Marvel time travel rules, and it was decided that someone was needed who could plausibly ignore those rules. Scryer was originally going to be Mephisto and was going to trick Peter into going back
Oh,
in time and becoming Ben Reilly in order to gain the soul of Judas Traveler, who would have been revealed to be a fallen angel. This
I'm
was
gonna
nixed
claw
for
my eyes out.
this was nixed for many of the same complaints that have come up against One More Day.
Because it's stupid as fuck.
Uh,
That sounds absolutely terrible. I thought it was when you said that they weren't gonna be, it wasn't gonna be a clone. I thought it was gonna be like that Peter had like a psychotic break and like it's like a multiple personality thing.
Is Ben Reilly in the room with us now?
Exactly.
Uh, the mini arc Final Adventure was supposed to retire Peter as a superhero and MJ give birth to their daughter. Before the final issue was completed, everyone involved knew Peter would resume being Spider Man, so Marvel wanted the mini to end with MJ having a miscarriage. Editor Tom Brevoort refused. The Life of Riley, which is a publication, even quoted him as saying, "There's no way in hell I'm going down in history as the man who killed Spider-Man's baby."
Dude,
Uh,
comic books fucking suck.
Yet another one here is that Eddie Brock was originally going to replace Peter as Spider-Man, using
Shut
this
up.
as a way to bury the hatchet between their rivalry and allowing Ben to continue under the Scarlet Spider moniker. The reasons for not doing this was because they were scared of separating Eddie from the Venom persona after much success with it, and thank God
Was
for
because
that.
it's stupid as fuck.
The Clone Saga began in '94 and lasted all the way to close to the beginning of '97 across every single Spider-Man comic. That meant that for over 3 years,
God.
there was no possible way to read a Spider-Man comic that did not involve clones. Back in the '90s,
That
if you wanted to see a Spider-Man story but were sick of clones, you could only watch the cartoon to get away with it. But in its final season, the '90s cartoon did introduce some Clone Saga elements, but left them isolated to specific storylines instead of being an overarching plot.
Dude, being a Spider-Man fan from like 94 to 96 sounds like the most miserable experience like ever.
That's what I was born into. I was born in March of '96, and this is the
That
world
sounds
as it
fucking like
was.
nightmarish.
I can't imagine. It's bullshit. Lastly, I have an interesting one here that's halfway trivia, halfway could have been. I thought you'd want to hear this, though. This is something interesting I found only this morning. While we may never know for sure what would have happened in Mark Webb's third outing of the Amazing Spider-Man franchise,
Yes.
there have been comments made by Dennis Leary that raised the possibility that the third film might have opened the floodgates of some kind of cinematic clone saga. Leary said in an interview that there was discussion of Peter in the movie either creating or ingesting a chemical during an experiment that led to the quote unquote resurrection of loved ones in his life,
Let's
presumably Captain Stacy, Gwen Stacy, Peter's parents, and Uncle Ben. It is
Dude,
somewhat
let's
possible
go.
it is somewhat possible that these could have been genuine resurrections, but if the writers were looking to the comics for inspiration, it's likely that they could have been clones as well. Presumably, this cinematic clone saga would have involved the ethical problems of what happens when loved one clones are brought back. Of course, Amazing 3 never made it into production, but it's highly possible this clone storyline would have been swept aside, since early days of production involve a lot of possibilities being hit back and forth. But it seems that it might have been on the table.
I firmly believe that if they had made a Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 3, they would have somehow made it worse than the second one. Like
Oh, I firmly believe that.
they could have absolutely hit it out of the park and made just the worst movie anyone has ever seen.
No, that could have been the be all end all killer of the franchise, I think.
And like I had obviously heard of this. That's why I reacted so positively to it. Was because I'd heard this story before and it sounded fucking awful. But yeah, bad movies.
And that's gonna wrap it up for my trivia segment there.
Whew. Yeah, all right. I guess we can go into our sort of our overall thoughts on this Clone Saga adventure. Uh, I'll go first because I'm the neophyte here.
By all means.
Uh, this was bad. I only read one comic that wasn't even like really related to the Clone Saga, and then 5 that were a part of it, and most of them were just kind of boring or poorly written. Uh, and just from hearing the description of what's going on from you on the Clone Saga, and you didn't even get to the whatever the fuck maximum clonage is, which sounds terrible.
It is.
Just it obviously sounds like Marvel was just wheel spinning. Like they were stuck in the mud and they were just wheel spinning the whole time, trying to figure out a way to get out of the situation they had written the corner they had written themselves into. Yeah, this sounds terrible. What I had read was not super great. And I never want to hear about this ever again.
I have a soft spot for the beacons that shine out of the darkness of the Clone Saga. Like we've talked about, I know a lot of people find the costume over the top and a product of its time. I have a soft spot for it. I think it's goofy. I like it. I like Ben Reilly as an idea of a character. I'm sad they don't do a whole lot to really flesh him out in the original time that we spend with him as what makes him distinct from Peter. I think that's a big problem that it suffers is he's the same character as Peter, and it's hard to have a story where you give too much of a shit about the same character twice like that. Um, it's very maligned and for very good reason. It meanders. It introduces a bunch of stupid shit that goes nowhere and does nothing. Um, it for all intents and purposes, I would say outside of One More Day is probably the arc people hate the most, and
That sounds right.
probably maybe more than One More Day and some of the diehard more haters of it because it lasted for so long.
Probably among some of the more veteran Spider-Man fans, it probably might be more maligned. But
It's probably
when we get to One More Day, I will fret not. I will be the one to make the final judgment call.
I probably will catch, or maybe not. I don't know. I like to think I won't catch any flack for saying I like the Clone Saga, and I don't like it on the whole. I do recognize that it is a bad. I hate to say it's a bad story because there is some in there that works as a Spider-Man story. The idea of oh shit, a second Spider-Man. How do we deal with this? It's sci-fi, and Spider-Man is at its core sci-fi. Um, it's bogged down in its grand operatic nature, and I think that hurts it a lot. I think it tried so hard to set itself up as like the Spider-Man story of the 90s, and it ended up being this big bloated overstuffed mess that a lot of fans would rather forget. I think it has its moments. I think it's neat, and if you have the time and the morbid curiosity to pick it apart, it's worth reading. But you have to know what you're getting yourself into. Um, I wouldn't say it's worth it, and I can't say I would recommend it, but I would say that if you're curious, try it. Try at least some of these, even just these beginning comics that we've read on this issue serve as an introduction of what to expect, but it goes downhill very fast. Uh, what more can you say besides that it's the Clone Saga?
Yeah, I'm sure you're not the only Clone Saga defender around here.
I hesitate to
Uh,
even call myself that. Maybe just appreciator.
Enjoyer. Uh, but you know, it's like it or not, it's a part of Spider-Man history, and it's unfortunately very important. Marvel keeps trying to bring back the Clone Saga. partially out of like a tongue in cheek, like, oh, remember when we did this fucking terrible thing? Like I think they're trying to do a Clone Saga for Miles, and that which sounds terrible.
Mm-hmm.
Just on the face of it, but it's certainly something. But yeah, I guess that's really it for what we have to say here. So yeah, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening. Now remember, if you got a question or a comment that you want us to read on next week's episode, you can send it to us at our email address, spideysignalspodcast@gmail.com, or you can shoot us a DM on our Twitter at spideysignals. Next week, for real this time, we're actually going to have a guest on. It's going to be a returning guest. If you remember last season, our episode about Infinity War and Endgame, we had Alex's friend, filmmaker named Brian Alexander, on board to talk about that. But we're going to talk about something that's more in his lane. The 1978 to 1979 Toei Spider-Man show. Spider-Man has a car. He's got a giant robot with a sword. The planet Spider is involved.
I've been looking forward to this for a while. Do we have an idea of what episodes we're watching?
I don't know. I thought we were going to have Brian pick those out. Has he even seen the show?
He's seen a good solid chunk of it. I'm gonna touch base with him, and we're gonna figure out a solid number of episodes to get under our belts to discuss.
We're gonna figure something out, but that's what we're doing next week. I think it's gonna be really fun. As we're gonna get into it in the next episode, I'm a really big fan of like Tokusatsu and those sorts of Toei shows. And I'm gonna be fucking in my element. And it's gonna be fun to have Brian on board. But yeah, until then, stay responsible. Oh, bye.
And I got nothing. I don't have anything funny to say this time. Jesus Christ.
How embarrassing.
I'm too busy reading the Clone Saga.